Westbrook University was a place steeped in history. The ivy-clad buildings, the grand old library, and the distant echoes of students' footsteps in the hallways created a peaceful image. But beneath its academic prestige, there was a darker, whispered tale that few students knew. Every year, a student went missing without a trace, and the library, with its labyrinthine aisles and towering shelves, was always the last place they were seen. Lena Blake had always dreamt of studying at Westbrook. Growing up in a small town, she'd heard legends about the university, how it was one of the oldest in the state, founded during the colonial era, and how its library was known for housing rare, ancient books. She had longed to immerse herself in this place, to walk through the marble hallways and to lose herself in the dusty corners of the library. But as she stepped into her first semester as a freshman, she realized that the university had its own share of secrets. Lena's first day was filled with excitement. Her father, who had never been to a university himself, drove her to the grand entrance. As they unloaded her luggage, he gave her a reassuring smile. "You'll be fine, Lena. Just remember, you're here to study, not to get distracted by mysterious stories." Lena smiled back, her mind already racing with thoughts of the places she wanted to explore. After her father left, she spent the rest of the day getting acquainted with the campus. But as night fell and the sounds of laughter and chatter faded, a chill ran through her. It was when she first visited the library that the unease began to creep in. The Westbrook Library was housed in an old building, its architecture grand and imposing. Inside, the scent of aged paper hung in the air. The library had 2 floors, with rows upon rows of books, some towering in immense shelves. There was something about the silence in the library, the way the vast space seemed to swallow every sound. Lena had come to study, but it wasn't long before her curiosity got the best of her. She wandered through the aisles, her fingers brushing lightly against the spines of ancient volumes. A strange pull led her toward the back of the library, where the lights flickered in a dim corridor. There, tucked between 2 massive shelves, was a narrow door, one she had never seen before. A plaque above the door read, "Restricted Area, Authorized Personnel Only." Her heart raced. She had always been drawn to things that others avoided. She had to see what was behind that door. After checking if anyone was around, she quietly turned the handle and stepped inside. The room was small and cluttered, filled with old wooden desks and stacks of yellowed papers. But it wasn't the room that caught her attention. It was the overwhelming silence. Even the faint hum of the lights above her seemed to disappear. Lena couldn't help but feel that something was off. As she explored the room, she noticed a journal lying on one of the desks. Its leather cover was cracked, and it looked as though it hadn't been touched in years. Lena opened it slowly, the faint smell of mildew wafting up. The handwriting was elegant, but the words on the pages were unsettling. The journal belonged to a student named Margaret, who had been attending the university over 50 years ago. As Lena read the pages, a chill ran down her spine. Margaret's writing grew more frantic as the entries progressed, detailing strange occurrences in the library and an overwhelming sense of being watched. Margaret described hearing whispers between the bookshelves, voices calling her name, and the sound of footsteps behind her, even though the library was empty. The last entry was the most disturbing of all. "I can hear them, watching me. They want me to join them. I can't leave. If I do, I'll never return. But if I stay, I fear I will disappear like the others. The library is no longer just a place of learning. It's a trap." Lena felt a shiver travel down her spine as she read the words. The journal ended abruptly, with no further explanation. Margaret's fate was never known. She simply vanished one evening, leaving behind only the journal and the chilling story of her disappearance. Lena's mind raced. She closed the journal and replaced it carefully on the desk. There had to be more to this story. What had happened to Margaret? And who were the others she mentioned? As Lena made her way out of the restricted area, she could feel her heart pounding in her chest. She thought about telling someone, a professor maybe, But the university had always been good at sweeping things under the rug. What if no one believed her? After all, it had been years since Margaret's disappearance. She couldn't be sure if anyone else even remembered her. That night, as Lena sat in her dorm room, the eerie quiet of the university seemed to press in on her. The lights from the hallway outside flickered, and the air in her room grew heavy. She tried to concentrate on her studies, but the events of the day lingered in her mind. The library, the journal, the whispers. Then, just as she began to drift off to sleep, she heard it. A faint, almost inaudible whisper, just beyond the door. It was soft, like the rustling of pages. Her eyes snapped open. The room was still. The whispering ceased. But Lena couldn't shake the feeling that something was there, watching her from the shadows. Was she imagining it? Or was something lurking in the quiet corners of Westbrook University? Something waiting for her to uncover its secrets, or become its next victim? The next day, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. Her thoughts constantly drifted back to the journal she had found in the library, to Margaret's eerie warnings. She couldn't focus on her classes or the new friends she was trying to make. All she could think about was the whispering, the shadows, and the unsettling silence of the library. After a restless night, Lena made her way back to the library the following afternoon, determined to uncover more of Margaret's story. The library felt different in the daylight. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting warm beams of light over the rows of books. But despite the peaceful exterior, Lena couldn't ignore the shiver that ran down her spine each time she glanced at the old wooden shelves. She walked cautiously toward the restricted area. The door was still locked, but she felt the urge to go back inside, to find more clues, to unravel the mystery that seemed to be calling her. As she stood in front of the door, she noticed something new, a faint scratch mark on the wooden surface, like someone had tried to claw their way out. The mark seemed fresh, almost as if it had been made recently. Lena hesitated for a moment. Was it safe to go back? The warnings of Margaret's journal echoed in her mind. But her curiosity and a deep sense of unease urged her forward. She pushed the door open, and once again, the familiar musty smell of old books filled the air. Inside, everything was exactly as she had left it. The journal was still on the desk, untouched. But now, there was something else. A shadow moved across the far corner of the room, and Lena froze. For a moment, she thought it was a trick of the light. But then, she saw it again. A figure, standing motionless, obscured in the dark corner of the room. Her heart raced. She couldn't make out the details, but the figure was unmistakable. It looked almost human, but its form was distorted, like a shadow clinging to the walls. "Who's there?" Lena's voice trembled. There was no answer. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, staring at her from the corner of the room. Lena's mind raced as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. Was it Margaret's ghost? Or was it something worse, something darker that had been trapped in the library along with the missing students? Lena turned and rushed to the desk, desperate to find any other clues. But as she reached for the journal, the door slammed shut behind her with a deafening bang, sending her heart into overdrive. The light in the room flickered, and the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally. She spun around, her eyes searching for the source of the movement. The room was suffocating. She could feel the temperature drop, the air thickening with a malevolent presence. And then she heard it, a soft whisper, barely audible over the sound of her own racing heartbeat. "You shouldn't have come back." Lena's stomach dropped. The voice was faint, but unmistakable. It was coming from the corner where the figure had been standing. Slowly, the shadow began to take shape, its outline becoming clearer. It was no longer just a dark spot. It was a woman, her features distorted, her eyes empty voids. She wore the same clothes as the student in the journal, a faded blouse and skirt, just like Margaret had described. But this woman was no longer alive. Lena stumbled backward, her legs weak with fear. "Who are you?" she managed to whisper, her voice barely a sound. The figure took a step forward, and Lena froze in place. The whispers grew louder, filling the room. It was as if the walls themselves were speaking to her, their voices a mix of fear and desperation. They never leave. They never stop searching. The figure's voice was hollow, echoing through Lena's mind. You will never leave either. Lena's heart pounded as the shadow advanced toward her. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to run, but her feet refused to move. The room seemed to close in around her, the air growing colder and colder with each passing second. She could feel the presence of something ancient, something malevolent that had been waiting for her, waiting for someone to stumble upon the truth of Westbrook's dark history. Just as the figure reached out toward her, the door burst open, and a figure stepped into the room. It was Aiden, her best friend from her freshman dorm. He had been searching for her, worried when she hadn't returned to the dorm the night before. "Lena!" Aiden shouted. He rushed forward, his eyes wide with panic. "What's going on? What are you doing in here?" Lena turned to him, her voice trembling. "Aiden, we have to leave. This place, it's haunted. There's something wrong with the library, with this room. It's not just a ghost, it's something worse." But before she could say more, the shadow lunged at her, its hands reaching for her throat. Lena screamed, but Aiden rushed forward, grabbing her and pulling her out of the room. He slammed the door shut behind them, panting heavily as he held her tightly. "What the hell was that?" Aiden gasped, his eyes wide with fear. Lena could barely answer. Her mind was reeling. What had just happened? Was it really a ghost, or had something far darker been waiting for her in the library? She could still hear the whispers in her head, as if the very walls of Westbrook were calling to her. "I told you," Lena whispered, her voice barely audible. "I told you the library wasn't just a place to study. It's a trap." The night after Lena and Aiden left the library, the air around Westbrook University felt suffocating. The campus, usually filled with students chatting or walking between buildings, was eerily quiet. A strange sense of dread had settled over everything. Lena couldn't escape the feeling that something was watching her even as she lay in her dorm room, trying to calm her racing thoughts. She had thought about going to the police, or at least telling a professor about what had happened. But every time she tried to explain what she had seen, the figure, the whispers, the words felt hollow. Who would believe her? It was all too absurd, too unexplainable. Her mind kept flashing back to the journal, the warnings, and the desperate cries for help from the ghostly figure in the library. "You will never leave." It wasn't until later that night, when she heard a faint knock on her door, that she realized she couldn't ignore the truth any longer. "Aiden," Lena asked as she opened the door, startled. "What are you doing here? It's late." Aiden stood in the hallway, his face pale and drawn. His eyes were filled with worry. "Lena, we need to talk. I don't know how to explain this, but I've been looking into the history of this place. The library, the disappearances, everything." Lena's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, looking into it?" "I don't know why, but something is pulling me to it too," Aiden confessed. "After everything that happened last night, I couldn't just let it go. I went through some old university records. There's something I need to show you." "You were right, Lena. Westbrook, it's cursed. And we're not the first ones to notice." Lena's stomach churned. "What do you mean by cursed?" Aiden stepped inside, and they sat on the edge of her bed as he pulled out an old folder from his backpack. Inside were faded newspaper clippings, some yellowed with age, others barely legible. He laid them on the bed before her, and Lena's eyes widened as she began reading the headlines. 1963, student vanishes in library, no trace found. 1972, another disappearance at Westbrook University. 1981, local woman claims library is haunted. The more she read, the more she realized that this wasn't just an isolated event. Each article mentioned the library, and each disappearance seemed to be linked to the same pattern. It was as if something had been feeding on the souls of the students, trapping them in a never-ending nightmare. But that's not all, Aiden said, his voice tight. I found an old letter. It was written by one of the professors, a man named Professor Harrison. He was here when Margaret disappeared. The letter talks about a ritual, a curse, and it says that whoever breaks the rules of the library will become part of the collection. Lena looked up at him, her voice trembling. What do you mean by the collection? Aiden took a deep breath. The professor's letter says that the library is built on land where an ancient ritual took place. A ritual to trap souls in the library to keep them there forever. The library is alive. It feeds off of the energy of the people who come and go. It's been waiting for someone to break the curse, and it's using Margaret's spirit to lure others in. Lena's mind reeled as the pieces started falling into place. Margaret wasn't just a victim. She was part of the curse, trying to warn others, trying to stop it. But Lena now understood the horrifying truth. She wasn't supposed to leave. We have to stop it, Lena said, her voice shaky. We have to do something before it takes anyone else. Aiden nodded, his expression grim. There's one way to break the curse. We need to go back to the library. We have to confront whatever is there, and we have to undo the ritual. But it won't be easy. The library won't let us leave. It will try to trap us too. Lena felt a surge of fear. She had seen what the library was capable of. The shadows, the whispers, the cold presence that seemed to follow her wherever she went. But she also knew that if she didn't act, the cycle would continue. Other students would vanish, just like Margaret, just like all the others before her. Together, Lena and Aiden made their way back to the library under the cover of darkness. The campus was deserted, and the wind howled through the trees. When they arrived, the library stood before them like a towering, ancient fortress. Its windows were dark, and the front doors creaked ominously as they pushed them open. Inside, everything was as it had been the night before, silent, cold, and oppressive. The bookshelves loomed over them like silent sentinels, and the air felt thick with something unseen, something malevolent. Lena's heart pounded in her chest as they descended into the basement, the place where Margaret's journal had been found. As they stepped into the restricted area once again, the temperature dropped even further, the cold seeping into their bones. The whispers began, faint at first, then growing louder, swirling around them like a storm. Margaret, Lena whispered, her voice barely audible. We're here. We'll fix it. We'll end it. But as she said the words, the figure of Margaret appeared before them, her form blurry and distorted. Her face was a grotesque mask of pain and rage, her eyes empty, hollow. You shouldn't have come back, Margaret's voice echoed, low and mournful. You will never leave. Before Lena could respond, the shadow lunged at them, its form growing larger, more monstrous. The walls seemed to close in, the very air thick with terror. But then, Lena remembered the journal, the ritual described inside it. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, ancient key she had found earlier, a key that seemed to glow faintly in the dark. With a scream, the shadow lunged at her, but Lena held the key high and shouted the incantation she had memorized from the journal. The key glowed brighter, and the air around them shattered like glass. The shadow screamed, its form twisting and distorting as the light from the key enveloped it. Then, with one final, deafening screech, the figure of Margaret disappeared, and the library fell silent. Lena and Aiden stood, panting, in the center of the room. The coldness was gone. The whispers had stopped. The library felt normal again. The curse had been broken. But as Lena looked around, she felt a lingering presence. One last, chilling thought crossed her mind. The library would always be waiting for its next victim. The wind howled through the darkened streets of Westbrook, stirring up the fallen leaves and sending them spiraling through the air. It was Halloween night, the night when most of the college students would be attending parties, enjoying the thrill of costumes and horror movies. But for Jake and his group of friends, this night would be different. Jake had always been the ringleader of their group, the one who suggested bold and sometimes reckless adventures. It was no surprise when he announced that this year's Halloween would be spent exploring the abandoned Blackwell Asylum on the outskirts of town. The asylum had long been abandoned, its decrepit walls and rusting gates a reminder of the dark past it carried. Stories of eerie sounds, ghostly apparitions, and the tragic history of the patients who had once been confined there had circulated for decades. But to Jake and his friends, it was just another thrill, another ghost story to prove wrong. "Are you guys in or not?" Jake had asked, his voice filled with enthusiasm as he looked around at the group gathered in his dorm room. Sarah, his girlfriend, sat on the edge of the couch, looking uneasy. "Jake, I don't know. I've heard the rumors about Blackwell. It's not just some abandoned building. People say it's haunted. You know how these stories go. I don't think it's worth it." Jake shrugged. "It's just an old building, Sarah. We go in, take a look around, maybe take some pictures and leave. What's the worst that could happen?" The rest of the group nodded in agreement, eager to be part of Jake's latest daring escapade. Among them were Charlie, the class clown who made light of everything, and Rachel, the quiet one who usually followed along with whatever the others did. Sarah had always been the voice of reason, but on this night, even she was reluctantly dragged into the idea. The group was bound for adventure, no matter how foolish it seemed. Later that evening, the group gathered at the edge of the town. The Blackwell Asylum loomed in the distance, its shadowy silhouette barely visible through the fog. The building stood at the end of an overgrown road, surrounded by twisted trees and a dilapidated fence that had long since been broken down. The asylum's Gothic architecture, with its sharp spires and crumbling stone, gave off an air of menace, even in the dim light of the full moon. Charlie let out a low whistle. "I've seen some creepy places, but this is next level." "I've got the flashlight," Rachel said, clicking it on as they walked toward the entrance. "Let's get this over with." The front gates creaked open as they pushed through, the rusty hinges groaning in protest. The group stepped onto the overgrown grounds, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of leaves and moss. The wind had died down, and an unsettling silence hung over the place. Not even the usual sounds of wildlife or distant traffic could be heard. It was as if the asylum itself was dead to the world. Jake led the way, excitement in his step. "I've read that the asylum used to house people with severe mental conditions. They did some pretty messed up things to the patients here. Electroshock therapy, isolation rooms, you name it. Who knows what kind of energy is still left behind?" Sarah shivered and wrapped her arms around herself. "I don't want to know." They reached the entrance, and the door, which had been left ajar for years, creaked open with a simple push. Inside, the air was thick and musty, and the dim light from the flashlight illuminated dusty furniture and shattered windows. The building had been abandoned for years, yet something about it felt disturbingly alive, as if it were waiting for them. The group moved cautiously through the asylum, their footsteps echoing in the vast, empty halls. Graffiti and old signs littered the walls. In one hallway, there was a large painted mural of a woman with wide eyes, her mouth open in a silent scream. The unsettling image made Sarah's heart race, but she said nothing. She simply followed the group, hoping they'd be done soon. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The air grew colder, and the sense of being watched became impossible to ignore. Sarah could feel the hairs on the back of her neck standing up, and every small sound, from the creaking of the floorboards to the distant drip of water, made her jump. Jake, sensing Sarah's discomfort, grinned. "What's the matter, babe? Getting scared? Come on, it's just an old building." But even Jake's bravado seemed to falter as they reached the heart of the asylum, the ward where the most dangerous patients had once been kept. The door to the ward was large and imposing, made of old, warped wood. A rusty sign hung above it, reading 8th Ward. Charlie pushed the door open with a loud screech, and the group stepped inside. The room was dark, but their flashlights revealed rows of empty beds, some of which were still chained to the floor. Desks and cabinets stood abandoned, their contents scattered across the floor in disarray. In the corner of the room, a broken wheelchair sat motionless, as though waiting for someone to occupy it. "This is where they kept the violent patients," Jake said, his voice lowering slightly as the weight of the room's history pressed down on them. "This place used to be a nightmare." Rachel's voice trembled. "We should leave. Now." But before anyone could respond, they heard it, a soft, distinct noise. A low thump, followed by another, then a faint scraping sound. The group froze, their flashlights spinning wildly as they tried to locate the source. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered. "It's just the wind," Jake said, but even his voice lacked its usual confidence. Another thump echoed through the building, louder this time. Then, just as suddenly, the room fell silent. Too silent. "What is that?" Charlie asked, his voice hushed, his earlier bravado gone. Before anyone could answer, a loud crash rang through the hallway. The door to the ward slammed shut with an unnatural force, and the group screamed in shock. "Run!" Jake shouted, his face pale as he sprinted toward the door. But when they tried to escape, they realized the horrifying truth. The door was locked. It wouldn't budge. Panic settled over the group like a thick fog. They tugged and pulled at the old, rusted door, but it remained immovable, as if some invisible force was keeping them trapped inside. The eerie quiet of the asylum seemed to press in on them, suffocating the air around them. "Why won't it open?" Sarah gasped, her voice trembling with fear. Her pulse quickened as the reality of their situation sank in. They were locked in, trapped in a place with a dark, twisted history. Jake slammed his fists against the door. "This can't be happening. We need to get out of here." Charlie stepped back, surveying the room with a fearful glance. It's not just the door, man," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Something's wrong. I can feel it." The dim light from their flashlights flickered again, casting strange, dancing shadows on the walls. For a moment, it looked like something was moving, a dark shape darting across the far corner of the room. The group froze, their hearts racing. "What was that?" Rachel whispered, her face pale. "Did you see that?" Before anyone could answer, the scraping sound started again, this time closer, much closer. It was as if something was crawling, dragging itself along the floor just behind them. "I don't know how, but I swear something is following us," Jake muttered, his voice shaky. He turned around, his flashlight scanning the darkness, but there was nothing there. Only the empty, oppressive space of the ward. "Okay, let's think this through," Sarah said, trying to steady her breathing. "We need to stay calm. We're not going to get out if we start panicking." "I'm not panicking, but we need to find another way out." Jake snapped, frustration and fear boiling over. "We need to find a window, anything." As they searched frantically for another exit, the temperature in the room dropped. Sarah shivered uncontrollably, her breath visible in the cold air. Something was wrong, far beyond just being trapped in an abandoned building. "Guys," Rachel said, her voice trembling, "I think we're not alone." The room suddenly felt alive with an eerie presence, the walls seeming to close in on them. The light from their flashlights seemed to grow weaker, flickering more rapidly now. They tried to stay close together, but it felt like something was tugging them apart, pulling them into the corners of the room. Then, as if on cue, the scraping sound grew louder, closer. It wasn't just a noise anymore. It was a feeling, a presence that was crawling toward them. They could feel it deep in their bones. The walls themselves seemed to be alive, shifting and groaning as if they were closing in on them. "We need to get out now," Charlie shouted, his voice cracking. His eyes were wide with terror as he looked toward the far corner of the room. "I can't take this anymore." But as he turned to run toward the door, it happened. The light from the flashlights dimmed to almost nothing, and in the darkness, they saw it, a figure. A woman, her face pale and gaunt, with hollow eyes and matted hair. She was crawling toward them, dragging her body along the floor in a slow, unnerving motion. Her limbs twisted in unnatural angles, and her mouth was open, as if she were trying to scream, but no sound came out. "Oh God, no!" Sarah whispered, her hand covering her mouth in horror. "It's her! Margaret!" Jake whispered hoarsely, his voice barely a sound as he took a step back. His heart was pounding, but he couldn't tear his eyes away from the crawling figure. The woman, Margaret, stopped just a few feet from them. Her head tilted to the side, her broken neck making an unnatural crack as she did so. The room fell into complete silence as the group held their breath. Even the air seemed to freeze. Then her eyes opened wide. The hollow blackness of her eyes locked onto each of them, one by one, and the room seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. "Get out," the whispering voice rasped from her lips. It wasn't Margaret's voice. It was something darker, something malevolent. "You shouldn't be here." The words echoed through their minds, and for a moment, the group was paralyzed. Margaret's figure twitched and convulsed, her limbs moving in jerky motions like a puppet controlled by invisible strings. The lights flickered once more, and when they returned to full brightness, Margaret was gone. The room was silent, except for the sound of their own breathing. "What the hell just happened?" Charlie gasped, backing away toward the door. "This isn't real. This can't be real." But Lena, Sarah, and Jake were frozen in place. The air was thick with the smell of decay and something metallic. Their hearts were still racing, and they could feel their pulse in their throats. "Whatever this is, it's not over," Sarah whispered, her voice shaky. "We need to get out of here, now." But as they made their way to the door again, hoping against hope that it might open this time, they heard the scraping again. Only now, it was coming from the other side of the room, from a door they hadn't even noticed before. The walls seemed to groan, and the air grew heavier. The door creaked open with a sound that was far too loud for its age. It was as if the building was alive, as if it was inviting them to enter, to explore deeper into its dark past. "No way," Rachel whispered, shaking her head. "I'm not going in there." But Jake, unable to resist the pull of the mystery, took a step toward the door. "We have to find out what's behind this. We can't leave without knowing the truth." Before anyone could protest, the door swung open wide, and the group stepped into the darkness beyond. The door creaked open further, revealing a narrow, dark hallway. The air felt colder as they stepped inside, the stench of rot and decay growing stronger with each step they took. It was as if they had entered another part of the asylum, one that had been hidden away for years, buried beneath layers of dust and secrets. Jake led the way, flashlight in hand, its beam cutting through the thick darkness. Sarah, Charlie, and Rachel followed reluctantly, their breaths shallow, each of them feeling the weight of the heavy silence pressing down on them. The walls seemed to close in, and the air itself felt thick, almost suffocating. "What the hell is this place?" Charlie muttered, his voice low and filled with dread. "We've already seen enough. Let's just leave." But Jake wasn't listening. His eyes were fixed ahead, his body moving with a sense of purpose that none of them understood. "We can't leave until we figure this out," he said, his voice tight. "I don't know why, but I feel like this is the only way to get out of here." The hallway stretched on longer than expected, and the temperature dropped even further. Their footsteps echoed eerily, the sound of their shoes scraping against the cracked floor tiles. The walls were lined with faded posters of long-dead patients, their eyes staring vacantly at the group as they moved past them. In some of the rooms, the windows were broken, revealing nothing but the blackness of the outside world. At the end of the hall, the group found a large wooden door, old and covered in cobwebs. It had a brass handle, tarnished with age. As Jake reached out to open it, a sense of dread washed over him, a feeling of being watched, of something waiting for him just beyond the door. He turned the handle slowly, and the door creaked open. Inside, the room was dark, but as the flashlight beam swept across the room, the group froze. It was a morgue. The room was lined with old metal slabs, some of them still bearing the faintest outline of bodies. There were rusty, blood-stained tools scattered across the floor, remnants of a past that the asylum had tried to bury. The walls were covered with peeling paint, and the air was thick with the metallic smell of decay. "This place, it's not just abandoned," Rachel whispered, her voice trembling. "It's a tomb." Jake turned to her, his face pale. "I think this is where they kept the bodies of the patients who didn't survive. The ones who were forgotten." But before he could say more, a loud crash came from behind them. The door slammed shut with a force that rattled the walls, and the group spun around in panic. The flashlight flickered, then went out. "No, no, no, no," Jake muttered, desperately tapping the flashlight, but it refused to turn on. The room plunged into darkness, the only sound the panicked breathing of the group. Then the scraping began. It started soft, like nails dragging across a surface. But then it grew louder, a shrill, piercing sound, as if something were crawling on the floor, dragging itself toward them. The group stood frozen, their hearts racing in their chests. "Who's there?" Sarah whispered, her voice shaky. She had never felt this helpless, this vulnerable. The scraping continued, but now it was accompanied by something else, a soft, agonizing moan. The sound of someone suffering, trapped in a place they couldn't escape. "Margaret!" Jake's voice was barely audible, filled with a mixture of fear and desperation. "Is that you?" There was no answer, only the sound of movement, something dragging itself closer. And then, from the far corner of the room, something moved. A figure, a shape, crawling along the floor, dragging its limbs in jerky, unnatural motions. At first, the group couldn't make out any details, but as the figure came closer, they saw it, a woman, her face twisted in pain, her mouth open in a silent scream. Her eyes were hollow, black pits where nothing remained but darkness. It was Margaret. Her limbs were bent at impossible angles, her body contorted as she crawled toward them. Her skin was pale and stretched tight over her bones, and her hair hung in ragged strands around her face. She moved slowly, deliberately, as though savoring every moment of her twisted crawl. Lena and the others backed away, their eyes wide with terror. The temperature in the room had dropped to freezing, their breath visible in the air. "Stay away!" Sarah cried out, but her voice trembled with fear. Margaret's head snapped up, her empty eyes locking onto them. And then, from deep within her, came a voice, not Margaret's, but something far darker, far more sinister. "You should never have come here," the voice rasped, its tone hollow and chilling. "This is where they left me. This is where I stayed, and now you will stay too." The figure lunged at them with unnatural speed, its mouth opening wide, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. It was no longer just a ghost, no longer just a spirit seeking justice. It was something else entirely, something twisted and hungry, feeding off the fear and pain of those who entered its domain. The group screamed as Margaret's twisted form collided with them, sending them stumbling backward. They scrambled to escape, but the room seemed to close in around them, the walls narrowing, the door locked tight. "No, let us out!" Jake shouted, his voice hoarse as he hammered against the door. But the room was suffocating them, the walls pulsating with the sound of whispers and moans. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the temperature plummeted further. Margaret's figure was inches from them now, her mouth opening wider, her claws reaching for their throats. But just as she lunged, the door to the room burst open, and a figure stepped inside. It was Professor Blackwell. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice calm, almost too calm as he stepped into the room. His eyes were empty, his face pale and unmoving. "You've all been caught in the same trap. And now you'll join them." The figure of Margaret stopped, frozen in place, her twisted form retracting as if bound by an unseen force. "Who are you?" Jake gasped, his voice barely a whisper as he looked at the professor. "I'm the one who's kept this place alive," the professor replied. "I'm the one who controls it." With a snap of his fingers, the room began to shift. The walls crumbled, the lights flickered back on, and Margaret's figure vanished as though she were never there. The group stood, breathing heavily, their bodies trembling from the cold. "Get out!" The professor's voice was the last thing they heard as the door swung open, and they ran, not daring to look back at the nightmare they had just escaped. Tara had been looking forward to her history class all week. As a history major at Westfield College, she was used to lectures that delved deep into the past, unraveling ancient civilizations and their most fascinating secrets. But this class, in particular, was different. This one promised to be more than just another routine history lecture. It was supposed to be a chance to learn from one of the best professors in the field. Professor Brooks had recently joined the faculty, and his reputation had preceded him. A man of mystery, he had lived in different countries, studied under some of the most prestigious historians, and his knowledge seemed boundless. His lectures were rumored to be like no other, captivating and challenging students to think outside the box. However, some students whispered that there was something more to him, something dark and unspoken. But Tara had never been one to believe in rumors. The first day of class was filled with anticipation. Tara found herself arriving early, eager to secure a good seat in the lecture hall. The room was a large, old classroom in the heart of the history building, its walls lined with bookshelves and ancient artifacts. It felt like stepping into a museum rather than a classroom, and Tara loved it. She couldn't wait to learn from the man everyone was talking about. As the clock struck the hour, the door creaked open, and in walked Professor Brooks. He was taller than Tara had imagined, with sharp features and a gaze that seemed to pierce through everyone in the room. His hair was dark and swept back neatly, his face stoic and serious, as if he were always thinking deeply about something. He didn't introduce himself in the usual way. Instead, he immediately walked to the front of the room, turned to face the students, and simply said, "History is not just a collection of facts. It is the story of those who came before us, their mistakes, their triumphs, their sins, and their redemption. To understand the present, we must first understand the past. But more importantly, we must learn from it." His voice was rich and authoritative, and his presence filled the room. Tara couldn't help but feel drawn to him, captivated by his words. This was unlike any history lecture she had ever experienced. Professor Brooks began the lecture, discussing the ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia, their rise and fall, their gods and beliefs. His knowledge was vast, and he spoke with such intensity that the class became completely immersed in his words. Tara couldn't take her eyes off him, hanging on every word. But there was something strange about his lectures, something that didn't quite sit right with her. As the weeks passed, Tara noticed small oddities about the class. The classroom seemed unusually cold, even when the weather outside was warm. The lights flickered constantly, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to move, as if alive. Some of the other students began to act strangely too. They would sit in the back of the class, staring at the walls, looking dazed and distant. Tara tried to ignore it, chalking it up to her imagination or the overwhelming nature of the class. But then, one evening, something happened that Tara couldn't explain. It was a few weeks into the semester, and they were studying the ancient rituals of the Egyptians. Professor Brooks was describing the process of mummification when the lights suddenly went out, plunging the room into darkness. There was a brief moment of confusion, followed by a low hum that seemed to reverberate through the room. Tara could hear the rustling of papers as students fumbled to find their phones to turn on flashlights. The hum grew louder, and suddenly, Tara felt a chill run down her spine. It was as if the temperature in the room had dropped drastically. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, and she instinctively glanced around, but everyone else was too focused on the lights to notice the strange sensation that had filled the air. The hum turned into a low whisper. Tara's heart began to race. She couldn't make out the words, but the sound felt wrong, like it was coming from somewhere deep within the walls. It was as if the building itself was alive, breathing in the dark. Tara's breath caught in her throat as the whispers grew louder, and she could feel them pulling at her, trying to draw her into something. Then, the lights flickered back on. The classroom was silent, save for the sounds of students breathing heavily, their faces pale. Professor Brooks stood at the front of the room, his expression unchanged, as if nothing unusual had happened. "Continue with your reading," he said in his usual calm voice, as if the moment of strange whispers had never occurred. "We must understand the rituals of the past to see how they shaped the civilizations of the present." Tara's heart was still pounding as she glanced around at the other students. They all seemed fine, as if they hadn't heard the whispers at all. It was as if nothing had happened. But Tara couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong with the class, with the professor. There was an unsettling presence around him, one that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. That night, Tara decided to stay after class and speak to Professor Brooks. She needed answers. Something wasn't right, and she needed to know if it was just her imagination or if something darker was going on. As the students filed out, Tara approached the professor's desk. He looked up from his notes, his piercing eyes meeting hers. His gaze was intense, almost unsettling. "Professor Brooks," Tara began, her voice hesitant. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, Tara," he replied smoothly, as if he had been expecting her. "What's on your mind?" Tara hesitated, unsure of how to phrase her question. "I felt something strange during the last lecture. The lights went out and there was this noise, almost like whispers. Did you hear it too?" Professor Brooks didn't seem surprised. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled together. "You felt it too, did you?" he said, his voice low and almost amused. "It's not unusual for certain energies to be felt in this room. The building has a long history, and sometimes the past calls out to those who are ready to listen." Tara frowned. "What do you mean? The past?" Professor Brooks smiled, a thin, knowing smile. "Some stories from history are not meant to be told, but some of us are destined to uncover them, to bring them back into the light. You, Tara, have a unique connection to this place, to the knowledge within these walls." Tara's heart raced as he spoke. She felt as though he were speaking directly to her, but she didn't understand what he meant. What did he know about her? And why was she feeling this strange pull toward him, toward his class? "I suggest you be careful, Tara," Professor Brooks continued, his tone turning serious. "There are things in this world that should remain hidden, things that can never be undone once uncovered. And some knowledge is far more dangerous than you could ever imagine." Tara stared at him, feeling a shiver run down her spine. There was something about his words, about the way he spoke, that made her feel as though she had just crossed a line that should never have been crossed. The next day, Tara couldn't shake the feeling that Professor Brooks knew more than he was letting on. There was something in the way he spoke, something behind his calm, collected exterior that left her unsettled. Her mind kept circling back to his words. There are things in this world that should remain hidden. What did he mean by that? Was he warning her, or was he trying to manipulate her curiosity? Either way, Tara couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was terribly wrong with the class, and with him. The following lecture felt different from the rest. As Tara entered the classroom, she noticed the air was heavier, the atmosphere more oppressive. The usual excitement of learning had been replaced by a sense of dread that hung over her like a storm cloud. The class was unusually quiet, as if the students were holding their breath. Tara glanced around, noticing how tense everyone seemed. It wasn't just her. There was a collective unease that everyone seemed to share. Professor Brooks entered as poised as always, but there was something in his eyes that unsettled her. He locked his gaze on her briefly, and for a moment, she thought she saw something flash behind his cold, calculating expression, something sinister lurking just beneath the surface. "Today, we will explore the darker side of history," he began, his voice calm but commanding. "There are truths buried beneath the surface of the past that, if revealed, can alter our very understanding of the present. Some of these truths are dangerous." Tara's pulse quickened. She remembered his warning from the night before. Some knowledge is far more dangerous than you could ever imagine. He continued, unfazed by the palpable tension in the room. History isn't just written in books. It's etched in the walls, in the very foundations of this place. And it's waiting to be uncovered by those who are willing to see the truth. The word struck her like a punch to the gut. What did he mean by this place? Was he talking about the university? Was there something hidden here, something tied to the school's foundation? Tara felt the weight of his words pressing down on her. But she couldn't just sit there. She had to know more. After class, Tara approached Professor Brooks again. The room was empty now, the other students having left, their faces pale and distant. She found herself standing in front of him, her heart racing. "Professor Brooks," she began, trying to keep her voice steady, "what did you mean when you said that some truths are dangerous?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he studied her with a piercing gaze that seemed to look right through her, as though he was searching for something deep inside her. For a moment, Tara felt vulnerable, exposed. "Sometimes, Tara," he said finally, his voice low, "the past has a way of calling out to those who are ready to hear it. And once you hear it, you can never turn away." "What do you mean?" she pressed, her voice rising slightly in frustration. "What truth are you talking about?" Professor Brooks took a step closer, his presence overwhelming. "There are forces at work in this world, things you cannot see, but they exist nonetheless. They are tied to the very fabric of history, hidden in plain sight. And sometimes, those who seek to uncover these truths find themselves lost, unable to escape." Tara felt a chill run down her spine as she absorbed his words. There was a hidden danger in this knowledge, something ancient and powerful. But she couldn't stop herself. She needed to understand. She had to know what was behind Professor Brooks' cryptic words, behind the strange energy that seemed to surround him. "Why me?" Tara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you choose me?" Professor Brooks smiled, but it wasn't a comforting smile. It was knowing, as though he had been expecting this question. "I didn't choose you, Tara. The truth did." Before she could ask him what he meant, he turned away, walking back toward his desk. "You should leave now," he said, his tone final. "The truth is always waiting for those who seek it. But be careful what you uncover." Tara stood still, her mind racing. There was something more going on here than just history. Something much darker. And she was at the center of it, whether she liked it or not. That night, Tara couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with questions. She knew she had to find out what Professor Brooks was hiding, but she wasn't sure if she was ready for what she might discover. The thought of delving deeper into the darkness that seemed to linger in the corners of the university filled her with both fear and excitement. As the clock struck midnight, Tara decided she couldn't wait any longer. She had to get answers. She grabbed her phone and sent a quick text to Rachel. "Meet me at the library in 20 minutes. I need to find something." The library was always open late, its towering shelves filled with knowledge and secrets. Tara hoped that whatever was hidden in its ancient books could shed some light on the strange things happening at Westbrook. When she arrived at the library, she was alone. The building was quiet, save for the sound of her footsteps echoing through the aisles. She made her way toward the back of the library, where the oldest and most obscure texts were kept. As she passed the rows of books, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. There, at the far end of the room, she found what she was looking for. A dusty, old tome, its leather cover cracked and worn. It was a history of Westbrook College, detailing the founding of the school and its dark beginnings. Tara opened the book carefully, her fingers trembling as she turned the pages. The history was filled with references to strange occurrences, mysterious disappearances, and long-forgotten rituals tied to the land on which the university was built. And then she found it. A passage detailing an occult ritual performed by the school's founders, an ancient ceremony designed to bind the souls of the living and the dead, ensuring the school's success and power. The ritual had been kept secret for centuries, until now. Tara's blood ran cold as she read the final sentence. The truth, once uncovered, can never be undone. Those who seek it will be drawn into the darkness, and they will never escape. Tara couldn't believe what she had just read. Her hands trembled as she turned the last few pages of the old tome. The passage she had found about the occult ritual performed by the university's founders felt like a dark curse written in ancient ink, sealed for centuries, and now unearthed by her own hands. The final sentence echoed in her mind: "The truth, once uncovered, can never be undone. Those who seek it will be drawn into the darkness, and they will never escape." The weight of the words sank into her bones. This wasn't just some old college tradition or a forgotten piece of history. This was something much more sinister, something that had bound the very soul of Westbrook College to the darkness that now crept through its halls. Tara felt a surge of panic as she stood there in the dim light of the library, the ancient book heavy in her hands. She had uncovered the truth, but at what cost? What had she just opened? The air in the room felt thick, oppressive, as if the walls themselves were closing in around her. A cold shiver ran down her spine. The whispers started again. The low, hushed voices she had first heard in the classroom now filled her ears, distant yet impossibly close, as if the library itself were alive and speaking to her. Tara froze, her heart pounding in her chest. "You should never have come here," the whispers taunted. She quickly slammed the book shut, as though trying to shut out the dark energy it had awakened. But it was already too late. The darkness had been unleashed, and now it was following her, stalking her every move. Tara grabbed her phone and sent a quick text to Rachel, hoping to reach her before whatever was happening could spiral further. "Meet me at the library now. It's worse than I thought." The response came instantly. "On my way." Tara didn't waste another second. She bolted out of the library, the feeling of unseen eyes watching her every step. She couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. The once familiar halls now seemed to stretch out endlessly, the shadows moving like living things, closing in around her. The air was thick with the weight of something ancient, and Tara could feel it. The darkness was waiting for her to make a mistake. She ran toward the main entrance, but the heavy doors wouldn't open. They were locked, as if the building itself were preventing her from leaving. She slammed her fists against the glass, her breath coming in sharp, panicked gasps. "Tara!" came Rachel's voice from behind her. Tara spun around, relief flooding her as she saw her friend hurrying toward her. Rachel was out of breath but determined. "What's going on? What did you find?" Tara quickly explained everything. The ritual, the ancient book, the whispers. As she spoke, Rachel's face grew paler with every word. She had always been the skeptical one, but now, Tara could see the fear in her eyes. "I don't know how to stop it, Rachel. I've awakened something, and I don't know what it wants from me." Tara's voice cracked as she said the words. Rachel's hand gripped her arm tightly. "We need to get out of here. We need to find Professor Brooks. He's the only one who knows what's going on." Tara nodded, feeling a wave of relief that at least she wasn't facing this alone. Together, they ran through the halls, looking for the professor's office, but it was as if the building had shifted. The walls seemed to change, leading them in circles. Hallways stretched out endlessly, doorways that were once open now sealed shut. "This isn't right," Rachel whispered. "We're trapped in here." Suddenly, they heard it, the sound of footsteps echoing from the darkness ahead. Slow, deliberate steps, as if someone was approaching them, walking at a leisurely pace. Tara turned to Rachel, her voice barely a whisper. "We're not alone. We're never alone." They stepped back, hearts racing, as the figure of Professor Brooks appeared from the shadows. His face was blank, his expression unreadable. Tara felt a cold chill run down her spine as he approached. "Professor Brooks?" Tara asked, her voice shaking. "What is happening? What did we uncover?" He smiled, a slow, knowing smile, but there was nothing comforting about it. "You shouldn't have come this far," he said, his voice calm but heavy with finality. "You wanted the truth, Tara, but now you must live with the consequences." Tara took a step back, her eyes widening with realization. You knew. You knew what this place was. The professor nodded. I have always known. I have been part of it for much longer than you realize. The ritual, the curse, the souls that have been bound to this place, they are mine to control. Rachel stepped forward, her voice trembling. What do you mean? What is this place? Professor Brooks' eyes darkened. I am its keeper. And now, Soryu, once you uncover the truth, there is no turning back. You belong to this place now as much as I do. Tara's heart pounded in her chest as she looked at Rachel, fear reflected in both their eyes. No, Tara whispered, shaking her head. No, we can't stay here. We can't let this continue. The professor raised his hand, and the room seemed to grow darker, the shadows stretching unnaturally. You have no choice. The darkness has claimed you, Tara. It is already inside you. Before Tara could respond, the ground beneath them began to shake. The walls seemed to bend and twist, as if the very structure of the university were alive. The lights flickered and buzzed, casting long, distorted shadows across the room. The air grew thick with a palpable sense of dread. Tara clutched Rachel's hand, her mind racing. She had to escape. They had to find a way out before it was too late. We will never escape, the professor's voice echoed, as the darkness closed in around them, engulfing them in its cold embrace.